Hello, everyone. My name is Nils Winkler. I'm the Secretary of the American Club of Hamburg. Welcome to the online series of the American Club. Today is a special event about a special photo reporter, Perry Kretz, who unfortunately can't be with us today because his age and health doesn't allow it. But we'll put together a video of this session afterwards and hope that someone will be able to play it to him. And we know he's here in spirit. Instead of Perry, we have Donald Schneider, the former art director of Stern magazine, and Hans-Hermann Klare, the former head of the foreign department of Stern magazine. Both know Perry very well and have been working with him for many, many years. Donald put together the book Perryworld, which he will introduce today, and Hans-Hermann will add some background stories and behind the scenes and anecdotes. So I'm looking forward to this session. As David Zeller says, everyone should have a glass of wine. This is prepared. Maybe you have a glass of beer as well. Enjoy the session. And the stage is yours, Donald and Hans-Hermann.
Since Hans-Hermann and me, we haven't seen each other in a while, but now by video, that we feel most comfortable if we just sort of have a casual conversation. We pop the book on the screen and we start telling a bit of stories and just jump in and go backwards, forwards. So to keep it a bit loose, not that one is holding a long monologue or anything. So I think I'm really happy to be in this program, and I would mostly say a big hello to Perry. I know he's not watching because in the place he is, there's apparently no internet, because otherwise he probably would be watching and would make already bad comments about us or something. But in any case, I think this is a great chance to just talk a bit about Perry, really, and try to give a bit of a feeling to everybody here on the line, how Perry is, who he is, where he's coming from, what his personality is. And I think we all met him, and we all met him in different situations. And I think there will probably in the next hour and so you will hear a couple of interesting things about a very interesting man who became a good friend of mine. And that is a bit the reason why we decided to make a book, because I think he really deserves to have a book. And I was a bit surprised that there is no photo book on him. There is a written biography on him, but there is no actual real photo book on him. And so it only took about 10 years to get it done, but we managed to get it done. So I think it came out earlier this year. And I would just to maybe say, it was also very important that Perry actually gets this book in his hands. So I traveled over to Hamburg, visited Perry with his wife, and we had a couple of hours together, and it was very emotional, very nice. And of course, he's, as you said, he's not in great health or anything, but we had a great time leaving to the book and seeing his reactions to photos, and it was fantastic to see him enjoying the book and seeing it actually, because I think for many years he always called me and say, "How far are you with the book?" And yeah, I'm not there yet. So I think, Hans-Hermann, do you want to just say something quickly?
Yeah, let me just say something, because maybe I'm not from the picture side, but from the word side. That is why I must say, when I was asked would I want to do something on Perry Wright or something, I said immediately yes. But also what struck me at the same time was I've never had such a fierce and horrible argument with anybody in the 40 years that I was in my profession as I had with Perry. This actually happened about 25 years ago. And as those arguments go, I don't even recall what we were fighting about. It just so happened that I wasn't happy with what he was giving us. He wasn't happy with what I was saying, and we were shouting at each other from about 10 centimeters away, and I kicked him basically out of the office. While I was sitting at my desk and fuming, 2 minutes, 3 minutes later, my phone rang, and it was the deputy editor-in-chief saying Perry was with him. and he hated what I was saying, and it was all wrong and all of this. So I made my point and my argument, and I argued and argued and argued. And the editor-in-chief then said, well, I perfectly understand what you're saying, but we go along with Perry, we print the pictures. So I thought, this is impossible, but all right, what can I do? It's his decision. Another 3 or 4 minutes later, the door to my office opened again, and there was Perry. He was grinning. He was saying, not very triumphantly, but he was saying, didn't I tell you? So we are going to do this. And well, it taught me a lesson. And as I don't recall the story, Perry always knew how to work a system, how to work any system and made it work for him. And this is the reason why Stern had a lot of wonderful photographs.
So here's the cover. It's actually a beautiful book, because it has like a nice book, beautiful, like a linen cover that was very important, and the beautiful photo in the front. So I think Perryworld was just a bit of a title to call it Perry's World, and just because he went everywhere and saw everything. And I think that the most interesting part I find about Perry's work is the mix of things, the places he went to, the things he saw, the people he met, and what he then managed to photograph. And I'm sure we can get into a lot of that later, but I think it's kind of that mix of I have never seen in anybody's work. I mean, usually photographers, they're specialized in one thing, but he has really covered the world in 50 years in such an incredible way. And so I think we decided to just go to the book a bit page by page, so to give you a little bit of an impression. And I think we can jump basically straight to the photo parts. This is a photo of Perry, and I think it shows a bit also his human side and how he was. And this is with the girl to the right of him is Kim Phuc. To the ones in this video conference now who maybe don't know who she was, she's the most famous photo which was taken during the Vietnam War was that photo of this naked girl running in the street, escaping from a napalm bombing. And that photo was shot by a Vietnamese photographer. And that went all around the world, and everybody saw that, including, of course, Perry, who happened to be in Vietnam at that time. And he decided to go look for that girl. And he found her, and he kind of adopted her, became her surrogate father or something. And because she had terribly burned skin, and he took her back to Germany so she could get skin grafts. And that more or less, I guess, saved her life. And she's still alive today, living, I think, in Canada, and they're still in touch occasionally. And so this picture just shows kind of Perry in action, the war photographer, die-hard war photographer with a big heart for children, for lots of people. And I think in this picture, he must be just showing her the story in Stern magazine. He shot previously about her, the documentary. And so I think that photo, because we thought, which picture can we put in the book of Perry, showing him? And rather than showing a lot of photos, because it's really about his photos, not photos of him, we just thought this is a really nice image, sort of showing him how he is. Maybe Hans-Hermann, you can always jump in there, so we can just...
Yeah. With this, I wouldn't say very much. I mean, we come most probably to Vietnam. The stories that come to my mind to Vietnam wouldn't really fit here. But what I remember is that he was at the, Kim Phuc must have been 30 or something years ago already when he visited with her and showed her around the offices of Stern magazine. I think they may have also had a TV show at some point in Germany, but it was really amazing how the long time Perry really stayed in touch with her and helped her in one way or another to get back into life. First of all, at the clinic in Ludwigshafen, were specialized on burned people, heavily burned people, severely burned people, and later helping her then to start life in, I wasn't sure whether it was Canada or whether it was around the Great Lakes in or around Detroit, but somewhere in that area, yeah.
So then we can just move a bit to the book. We have in the beginning, of course, some texts. We got Walter Unger, a good friend and colleague of Perry, wrote actually a beautiful piece on him. And but if you wanna know more about that piece, I advise you to buy the book. So we don't want to read that out loud now; that would take too much time. We also got a friend Clement Schick, who's a great German actor, who was actually the villain in a James Bond movie, and he wrote a really nice essay on this book on Perry too. That's on this page. But again, I think the best is we hop right into the first story. The whole book is structured in different chapters, because I think Perry worked mostly story by story by story. It's not so much a photographer who shot one photo here and one photo there. He always, with every story he shot, he had in mind how it would look and be in Stern in the magazine. So he was very much always thinking single page or double page. And me as an art director, I know that one of the challenges with horizontal format photos is that there's nothing really important in the middle, because that would disappear in the gutter. And Perry knew that too. So I think the way he approached these stories were always thinking of single pages and double pages. And so in this book now, we have all these different kind of stories he shot in different places, and they're not in historical order in the book. So it's a bit more to entertain. When you look, it's a bit more surprising, going from one story into the next. And the first one here is about a gang actually two gangs in New York. And it's a subject he knew very well. I mean, Perry grew up in Germany, of course, during the war. And I think during the actual war, the last years of the war, he grew up in Cologne. And during the bombing time, his parents put him into the mountains in Allgäu. And he would always tell me a bit like, you know, all these little Perry stories, but he was mischievously always grinning a bit and say when he was, I think, 12 or 14 or something, up in the mountains in the last winter from 44 to 45, because he was good in sports and boxing and cycling and all that. He was also good in skiing. So he, as a little boy, teenage boy, was training some SS troops in skiing. At least that's Perry telling stories like that. It's, you know, if they're true or if they're not 100% true, that's not the point. But he was in all these places and he saw all that. Maybe when he tells the story, it's maybe slightly exaggerated, but also that's the way he operated, and meeting people and talking himself into these places to go shoot photos. So then he moved to New York, and he told me he actually became a gang member in a Puerto Rican gang in the Bronx. So he was very familiar with that territory of gangs and the criminal underbelly of New York, and he felt completely comfortable in that world. That was his universe. And I think also maybe to say Perry is not really the big storyteller. He lets the picture speak for what he sees or what he does.
Well, let me add to this. Yeah. It's interesting to see the kind of stories he has done and that are in the book, because they do reflect indeed his life to some extent. As you mentioned, the gang colors in New York. Yes, he was in this Puerto Rican gang. When he arrived in New York, I think it was in 1950, he started working somewhere in the garment districts where he met those Puerto Ricans. And so he was looking for friends, and they introduced them to the others. And then he soon realized, well, it was a gang. And basically they were asking small shopkeepers for protection money. So he joined them and he did this a little bit, but he got bored by it because he was always after the grander scheme, which is why he left this gang very soon in order to join the mafia as the larger organization when you are interested in finding out about these things.
So this story here is about the gang, and just to flip a bit to the pages. I mean, that's let's say early 70s or late 60s, I would imagine. And those were the rough days in New York. And as a white German guy, to feel comfortable around these kind of guys and them also accepting him and letting him into their world is amazing. I mean, because these were not people who like to be photographed. That's not like today. In those days, people who had a bit of a criminal side did not want to be photographed. And he was there, and he was always, what I also like about Perry's photos, they're never judgmental. He never says this is a bad person or a good person. He's just taking the picture, and he lets the viewer then figure out what to think about the situation or about the people.
And he was a street kid. You see, he was doing black marketeering as a young guy in Cologne, as kind of survival in the bombed out city. He was what was called a Springer. So they jumped on trucks that were loaded with anything. And your job was to jump on the truck and to throw off the back of the truck as many of the goods that you happened to come across until you were detected, and then you ran away. So he was a street kid, and the fact that he was a street kid and that he continued with this in the US also, I think, was responsible for some of his success, because he could enter those groups as they had a feeling that he understood them in one way or another, rather than coming from the outside, from a completely different background, as different as it was. He could speak their language, he could read them, they could read him, and that's how he built trust and got the photographs.
And here is a good example in the book on the Perry's life, how things just jump. So here we are in the 60s, early 70s. You can see it with the cool looks and the afros and the thing in New York. And then he's probably just a week later or whatever, a couple years later, bang, here's Perry in Liberia, in the Civil War. And where does he go? He goes to the most important guy who's around there, and he goes to a guy who calls himself General Rommel, I think, and who has an army of...
Drafted into the army, and that was the way to receive the US passport. It was during the time of the Korean War. And while he was still in training somewhere upstate New York, somebody then asked, well, is there anybody who knows how to photograph? And Perry, who had never done a photograph, then said, yes, me. So he received the camera, a Yashica, whatever it was, and he started. And he did it, first of all, sufficiently good so that they wouldn't detect the fact that he couldn't do it. And then he said for some time he did the most boring pictures of his life, and the generals liked him for being photographed exactly the way that Perry did it, whether it was the colonels or the generals, which made him not go to Korea very quickly. When he finally then arrived in Korea, luckily the war was coming almost to an end, so he received then his American citizenship without doing too much as a soldier, which doesn't say that he would not have done it, because as what we know as a journalist later on, he was not afraid in going into all these kind of situations. But this was how he became a photographer, as a soldier, basically.
So that was his calling, then coming back to New York, and he thinking of himself as a photographer, and of course being drawn a bit to the crime and underworld. He started working for the NYPD. So it's a bit like VG, the famous photographer, always being on a radio call if there was something going on in New York, some shooting, some killing, some big accident. He would go there and kind of document the scene, and shooting the dead bodies lying around and things like that. But at the same time, he also had to do a bit more than that, to not just work for the police department, but he was also drawn to, he wanted to shoot more for magazines and get his photos published and make also some money. And for him, a way to get into magazines was to photograph celebrities. And so as a young, aspiring photographer, he whenever he knew there was a celebrity around or something, he went there and he took pictures of these celebrities. This is the photo I like a lot, is with Hemingway and his wife, and that's at a boxing fight. And also maybe interesting, also technically speaking, I think these early photographs of celebrities, he did them in larger format cameras, so they have a different quality than later when he went to war to do his war reportages, where he had 35 millimeters. So here it maybe was still, it was not so much a reportage, it was, he would probably always go there and try to get one good picture with the celebrities.
And this is how Stern got aware of him, or the founder of Stern, Henry Nunnan. And so they approached him while he was in New York doing these pictures back in the 60s. They approached him and asked him whether he would like to work for the magazine. Perry was hesitant, not because he didn't want to work for the magazine, but because the magazine said, but then you have to leave New York and come to Germany. So for a while he considered it. Basically he agreed, but then he said, well, for himself, he wanted to make sure that he could travel to the US as often as possible, which he then did. He did, if not, presumably not most of the stories, but for many years, he was the photographer in the US for Stern magazine. So going back to his favorite country.
This is a bit of an unusual photo for Perry with the tennis player Steffi Graf. He photographed her in Florida early in her career. And I like this picture because I think Perry didn't think of himself so much as a celebrity photographer. I think he just did that when he was kind of obliged to do it. But then when he did it, he wanted to do a bit something a bit special. And this picture actually shows it. It was funny when the book came out and some magazines started printing stories, little essays or stories about the book. This was the photo most magazines asked for. I don't know, it must have hit something. I don't know if this particular photo came out at the time, that I don't know, but I thought it's good to show it in the mix. And that's a bit more the traditional thing from his early part in the career, when he just had to go somewhere where there were lots of other photographers around. This was a ticker tape parade for who was that?
German President Theodor Heuss in New York.
Yes. So that was from 1958, so very early in Perry's career. So you can see that was also with a large format camera, or a bigger format camera, because you can see every little detail and everything. And so I think when he had to go to places where a lot of other photographers were, I think he wanted to show that he was observing everything. So he didn't just try to take a close-up or so, always try to see a bit, show a bit the scene or a moment. That's again one of his portraits. So that's probably when Stern, or I don't know what magazine, asked him, why don't you go, you know, like we have actor Horst Buchholz is in town in New York, he's in a hotel, can you go take a picture of him? It's maybe not an amazing photo, but I like what you can see is how Perry worked. It's charming always everybody and gets something special, personal out of them, which doesn't feel fake. Like it, you know, it doesn't feel like he choreographed the picture. So I think he just more provoked people to do things which he then documented. And I like that. And person who actually is just having his comeback right now. It's Mike Tyson. So Perry was always also very interested in boxing. He went to many boxing fights. And the man behind him, I think some of you might know, that's Don King. And that is the perfect example of a person Perry likes, because Don King is part criminal underworld, part glamorous, part boxing, perfect person for Perry. Hans-Hermann, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, exactly, exactly. He was on good terms, as I understand it, with Don King, and it was Don King's whom he was in touch with for a long time, and who basically made sure he had the access, even before Tyson. Wasn't Don King also involved with Cassius Clay or Muhammad Ali later on? I think he was. So that's, I remember that even later, it was always Don King who made things possible, or not always, but often for him.
Then there's also even the moment where Perry met Marilyn Monroe. I mean, he met everybody in those days. So that's funny. But again, you know, he's not sneaking in trying to take a picture of Marilyn Monroe, because that wouldn't be possible. So he shows the whole situation of everybody being there. And here he had access himself. So then that's a different ballgame for him. And this is Siegfried and Roy in Las Vegas in the desert. Actually, one of them, I never know which one is which one, but one of them just died, I think, a couple of weeks ago.
I think the blonde one.
This photo is actually interesting to have a little comment from Perry, because his story to this photo is that this is the most frightening moment in his life, because he has been to war zones and everything, but he said he was never as scared as right here in the desert with Siegfried and Roy, because the lion who's on top of the hood of the car, he in the beginning didn't have a rope around the neck. He was just running around Perry, this big lion, sort of roaring at him out there in the desert. So he asked Siegfried and Roy, could you at least please put a leash on him? He was so scared that he would get eaten up by this lion. And yeah, great picture. Again, like Perry provoked, he probably just told them, knowing him, I think he probably just told them, oh, how about we go out into the desert with a lion or something like that. I mean, I think this picture is also shows very well how he created his photos, getting people to do something which maybe in their environment seems normal, but for us, looking at it, this is not normal. I mean, nobody goes out in the desert on a horse with a jeep, with a lion, and then he's there and takes the picture.
Yeah, but then what's normal in Las Vegas?
Yeah, that was normal in Las Vegas. And then Perry also met Elvis. I mean, actually, he even photographed the Beatles coming out of the airplane the first time when they touched down in Idlewild Airport before it turned into JFK Airport. And Perry was there taking the picture, but he actually lost that image. I saw it once, but we couldn't find it anymore. But Perry was everywhere. He saw everything and everywhere. So here's a jump now in later in his career, Perry still being the war photographer. And so even, what age was he at the time he went to Afghanistan? What do you think, Hans-Hermann?
I don't know. Let's count. He was born in 1936, correct?
Yes.
Yeah. So, and then his latest assignment was in the Iraq War in 2003. That was. So we are coming to 64, 67. He was embedded with the U.S. Army, so, and this must have been maybe a year or two around that time. So he was. Yeah, he was the oldest embedded journalist, most probably with the U.S. Army ever.
And this picture also shows the trust Perry had from these people, because I don't think this kind of a situation the U.S. Army particularly wanted to have documented. But Perry probably sneaked in there and was friendly with everybody and took that photo. And Perry even yes, yeah. I think this picture, I'm not sure, but there are Guantanamo pictures coming up. So again, Perry always he somehow always thought that prisons make interesting photos. Frontline soldier. I think the story with this picture was this, the soldier looks very sad. I think Perry photographed him on his bunk bed, and I think some of the soldier's comrades just died this day. And so he took that picture and kind of
there is an interesting observation more in general about Perry reporting on wars, and that is something maybe specifically German. If you look at the editing staff of Stern magazine, but at newspapers or other magazines as well, you will find that for historical reasons in Germany, people were always, after 45, very skeptical about armies, about soldiers, about going to war. So usually you would say the writers at Stern magazine were people who were conscientious objectors who had never been with the army, yet they were supposed to go into wars in order to report on them. So Perry, who had been with the army, who seemed to enjoy it, who seemed to get along, was in some way the odd one out. But people also knew they needed him, and without him, it would not have been possible. It's actually an interesting contradiction how this guy, who in some ways didn't fit into the magazine, was so important for the magazine getting stories, and how the writers who were not very comfortable about going to war then went to war only thanks to Perry and got stories they were happy with afterwards.
I think this was from what he told me was his last assignment, which was called The Hunt for Bin Laden in the Bora Bora Mountains. I think that's the last time he actually put a helmet on, flak jacket, and went into the battlefield. So then he must have been at least 70, I guess. So now we go back again to another time. I guess that must have been late 70s, something like that, in Philadelphia. Bad neighborhood, crack, drugs, junkies, and Perry getting again very close up in these kind of situations, haunting pictures. I think, you know, with, again, like I think these guys, they don't want to be photographed particularly, but he managed, and he took these photos where you can really feel the moment and the atmosphere and these people, and also these kids. I think they're pressing their faces up against the windows in the door, where that's, I think, the other side is the mother smoking crack. So bad, terrible situations, but I think he knew how to get these pictures there. Then Perry with the police department, he of course very friends on that side too. And this is a little story he always liked a lot. Him going into the subway with some undercover cops who dressed up in different characters, arresting some suspects. So I think he thought that was a funny story with all these different detectives here dressing up as a Hasidic Jew and as a whatever, like b-boy or all these, or businessmen and all that. So all these people in this photo, they're all cops. And yeah, it's a good example. Perry taking a horizontal wide shot, you know, so it makes a good story, a double page in a magazine, bit of action. And then one of his favorite subjects, mob. So I think this story, it's one of my favorite stories of Perry's photos. It reminds me a bit of a Tarantino movie with these, I mean, these are, I don't know, marshals or something, FBI marshals, and they look like they're real tough guys with their suits and submachine guns. And the guy in the middle, as I remember, is a former mafia guy who started to be a crown witness against the mafia, and therefore had to, like, they had to give him surgery and change his face so that they could give him a new identity. So this is, I think, this is really something only Perry manages to be there and take that kind of photo. And the study of this moment incredible.
Again, Perry had a very good understanding for how the mafia worked and how they worked in order, and the police worked, so that he got the access others wouldn't. And part of it may again be that Perry, after he had left the Puerto Rican gang, then he joined the mafia in the 50s, and he was a so-called runner. A runner meant that he was sent to horse betting courses, and mafia people were in betting offices several miles away and betting on horses to win or to whatever position. Perry's job basically was to run to the next telephone as soon as a race was over, and to inform the mafia guys on the other side what the result of the race was. And they were holding off publishing the results of the race, so they had the time in order to place their bets on exactly the horse that was going to win. It was Perry who had these 2 minutes before. And the mafia made a lot of money out of it, and Perry got his share of it. That's his entrance into the mafia. But there was also, but I don't recall the details, unfortunately. Maybe you know, Donald. There was also a woman that he got to know, and he had a love affair with somebody, and crossing lines within the mafia that you were not supposed to do. Some kind of street girl he got to know. Do you know that story? Has he told you about it?
I think it was something a bit like when he was in the Puerto Rican gang. I think he fell in love with a girl, and she happened to be Italian American, and her father had something to do with the mafia. That's how I remember it. But again, this is a Perry story, so maybe he told it in a couple different ways, and you heard it in a different way than me. But I'm sure something like that happened. So he was in there. This neck picture, I mean, come on, that could just be straight out of a Tarantino movie. With these guys, and then the mafia guy who has to be heavily protected, because otherwise the mafia is definitely out there to kill him. So the FBI has to protect him and make sure he doesn't get killed, because they need to find out everything he has to say. And it's also a character study. I mean, how life was back then, and with beautiful photo with these kind of cars, and how they're dressed, and how each one looks into a different direction, and the guns they have with the suits. Amazing photo, I love it. And then
they even dressed properly at that time.
Yeah. And here that's a picture Perry took during the time he was working for the NYPD. So I think this was probably just a normal day in those days in early 70s in New York, in the morgue. This other guy is probably kind of friend of Perry, a colleague, a guy who also properly works for the police, with his gun stashed into the pants, taking headshots of the dead people arriving today from crime scenes. And then the next picture again, I don't know if anybody of you knows who that is, but I lived in New York myself in the 80s, and this guy was a very famous character. I mean, probably a bit on the level like Donald Trump. It's about the same style, They called him the Dapper Don. John Gotti, and so here it was. I don't know what that situation was, but probably from somewhere from police house or something, being transported back to prison or something.
If I recall it correctly, he got a tip, maybe actually from the guy you are showing now, that when Gotti was being put from one place into another place, coming out of some building, so that there was a chance of a few seconds basically to take this photographs. Usually there were no photographs of Gotti at the time.
This guy here is Remo Franceschini, and I think he was very important to Perry and Perry's work, because he was the specialist in the NYPD for all the mafia. And you can see in the back, very interesting, that that board with the different family clans from the different mafia clans, from the Lucchesi and the Genovesi and the Gambino and the Colombo, and with all the headshots. And I think Perry knowing that world very well. So I can only imagine the kind of conversations they used to have together. And Perry being a good person at heart and knowing the other part and dancing between those two worlds, I think also for this police officer, also for Remo Franceschini, I'm sure it was very valuable to have Perry around, giving him a lot of insight. So I think this portrait, I would say, is like a Perry photo of a friend and colleague of him. And this is another photo of his police days, and the caption just says, "Just another day in Little Italy, Lower Manhattan." It's probably just what Perry saw many, many times, dead people. And I think, yeah, most people in our lives, most people probably have never even seen a dead person. And Perry saw many, many, many of those. And that also affects one's life, and that affects personality. Now we jump back to Africa again, Rwanda. When we made this book and talked a bit about the different chapters and looked into the photos, and for all of you know, Perry is always a bit like a funny guy and not so easy to throw off balance and stuff, and charmer and tough guy too from all these situations. But I have to say, I only have seen him in all these years. I've only seen him once, sort of sad and having teary eyes. And that was when he was talking about Rwanda. It's like that affected him deeply. And he was always like, he was kind of couldn't even say much anymore when he talked about Rwanda, especially when talked about this picture here. He said that, and that day when he was there, he had one water bottle with him for the day, and these people from one horizon to the other, walking by in the street, all the refugees, mostly children and women and older people. And he said they were all dying from thirst, and they were all frightened, and people would just pass out unconscious and die. And they were looking at him, begging if he has something to drink. But he said, but what can you do if there are 10,000s of people who are all thirsty and want something to drink, and all he has is this one bottle of water, and he himself is thirsty too. So it's just, I think that the Rwanda experience really affected him deeply. And also, as we know, remembering him, remember Perry in sort of the last years when he was also often coming into the office to Stern, even though he was long retired, but he liked that coming in. And he could just, I always looked at Perry a bit like as a tiger pacing around. You know, he was not somebody who likes to sit around. He was always moving and standing up and walking and moving around. So I think that also had a lot to do with all the things he has seen in his life. And that, you know, he probably had a lot of dreams about it, or still now has a lot of dreams about it and thinks about it. These kind of situations, and Hans-Hermann, you were in these kind of situations too. Maybe you can talk a little bit about Rwanda and why that had a particular effect.
The interesting thing about this photograph is that it must have, it was not during the time of the genocide or just after, immediately after. It must have been a month later, because the conflict, even though the world had lost the interest of 94, it went on into towards the end of 94 into 95 and further on. I think he was there with the right, I was at that time already foreign editor, so I was not on the road anymore as I was in 94 during the genocide. And in the aftermath, when millions, thousands and thousands died of cholera. Here we have all these movements of people into Rwanda, out of Rwanda, into neighboring countries like Congo that used to be Zaire. You had these, people were constantly pushed around by warlords, by local thugs and what have you. And I remember he was there, and it must have been late in the year, maybe of 94, that he came back and with these pictures. And what really got us and what got him is that we were only half a year, three quarters of a year before everybody was talking about Rwanda. Everybody was there. Christian Anampour pushing everybody to the side because she was CNN, and now half a year later, nobody looked at it anymore because the world had moved on basically to other things. And Perry decided to go there. And Perry also decided to do a few other stories, like the picture we've seen before. It's the pictures of those people who were imprisoned, rightly or wrongly, because of the genocide. Thousands, prisons overflowing. Here we are with the prison, the general prison of Kigali. Families waiting. It was a nightmare even after the genocide.
Will we cut off in a couple of seconds? Zoom just tells me. So I hope that doesn't happen.
And now we come to the Vietnam part. Kind of a normal life there, with living in the hotel, hanging out together, and go to the bars and stuff. And then they would always be told the night before, or even in the morning or during the night, that next morning very early they have to be at the airport, and they're being flown by helicopter to the front line and then back again to Saigon in the evening. And he said, yeah, then sometimes, you know, when you're being flown to the front line, not everybody makes it back. So maybe some of your colleagues, one or two of your colleagues, they die during that day, and then you fly back, and then back to normal life. You have to go to the hotel. And he said, when you come back after a day like that, you're being flown back from the front line and you saw some terrifying action. It's not that you land at the heliport or the airport and you go straight to the hotel and have a nap or sleep. You're all wired up, and you need to go and have a couple of whiskeys and talk because it's so emotional. And so he was always telling a bit about how life for him was, or what happened. I think this picture here in particular, Hans-Hermann can tell a bit of a story, because that day something very particular happened. He was on a mission, like as the photographer covering this unit, who was rolling with their tanks. But then something happened.
Yeah, whether it was exactly on that day with this picture, I don't know, but
it was. He told me that was that day.
Was it okay? But what happened is basically they were on the way with a U.S. Army unit when they were ambushed by Viet Cong. It was a heavy assault, and the shooting did not abate, and it went on and on and on, and they did not know how to get out of the whole situation. So at some point, a soldier next to Perry handed him an M16 rifle and said, "Shoot, we have to get out of here." Perry and his colleague, he was with a writer as well, they insisted on not doing it because the Geneva Convention clearly states that journalists in armed conflicts are not allowed to participate in the armed conflict. So what to do? The shooting went on, and after a while, Perry then said, fuck the Geneva Convention, took the M16 rifle and basically emptied it into the bush. And whatever he hit or not hit, we don't know, but they finally succeeded in getting out of the situation, and at the end of the day, also going back to Saigon.
Then that's GI life in Vietnam during the war. So again, like, it was not everywhere was war. I mean, they had some time off too. That's Harry being in the field. Almost feels like he's part of them. He's part of that unit. He's part of the soldier's life. That must be in the front line in a battle scene. Probably when Perry was looking where the bullets are hitting so he can run the other way. And here's a picture of Kim Phuc, how he found her. But I think that must be the first time Perry actually, when he went looking for her, and he found her, and that's how she looked then, with all the burn scars and everything. That's then later, maybe that was already when they came back from Germany, from skiing crafts. And he became friends with her and her family, and he went back there many times. This is also a very particular photo. It's maybe not so spectacular as a photo, But the story is spectacular because it was actually when Perry came back from one of these frontline visits, and they landed at night, and it was exactly that situation. Him with his journalist buddy, they saw some action during the day, and they decided that, oh, come on, let's go and have a drink. We know this one bar. I think it's called Tudor Bar or something. It had the Vietnamese band play. He said they were a bit a copy of ABBA, but the Vietnamese version, and that's where a lot of GIs were hanging out. And they went to that bar, and they're just ordering a drink, just a big whiskey, something. And in that moment, somebody threw a bomb into the place. And I need to look it up exactly how many people, so I don't say the wrong number. But
27 people died, 40 people were injured, and most of them were GIs, yes, because this was a hangout for GIs.
And that was on the 15th of September 1971. And Perry, he went unconscious. He remembered waking up a while back. He didn't know for how long he was unconscious. It was all dark. There were lots of dead people and screaming, injured people around. And he said the blood was running out. He could feel the blood running out from his ears and his eyes and the nose. And the ears were whistling, and he had to kind of crawl over all those bodies and injure people and make it out. Him and his journalist buddy, they made it out, and they were okay. But since that day, his eardrum blew. So Perry actually does not hear anymore on one ear. And but he was lucky, and he made it out. There's actually a follow-up story to that image. 25 years later, he was invited again to Vietnam because he saved Kim Phuc, and that was, of course, for the Vietnamese communist government, a bit of propaganda material, Kim Phuc and the bad Americans and all that, and because Perry was essential with Kim Phuc's doing well and stuff, so they invited him to visit Vietnam. And that was the first time he went back there after the war. And when he arrived at the airport, he had a translator there with him. I don't know who else was with him, but he said when he got out of the airplane, there was this lineup of Vietnamese generals, older generals and Viet Cong generals. They're all with a lot of medals and everything. And he went from one to the other, and they shook hands. And there was a Viet Cong general, a woman there with a lot of medals. And he asked the translator, oh, can you please ask her where she was during the war, whether she was stationed in the jungle or what did she do in the jungle? That was very unusual, a woman general. And he asked her, and the answer came back, no, she was stationed in Saigon, and she made attacks on GIs in Saigon. And she said, maybe you have heard of it. She was the one who threw a bomb into the Tudor Bar. So here he is, 25 years later, Perry meeting the woman who actually threw the bomb into this place. And Perry being Perry, he told me when that woman said that, he got a bit of soft knees, but then cut himself up and told the translator, tell her, bitch, you didn't get me. That's a bit of a Perry story, but it's amazing what he has seen in his life and what he went through so far. So I think I have a lot of respect for him and how he still managed to be such a genuine person and a warm person with all of this. And then jump into the other side of Perry again. We go into Mexico, into the Sierra Madre, the drugs, place where he often went to Latin and South America, covering drug raids and just being there, reporting on, photographing these situations. I think also this photo, I think even a Tarantino couldn't think that up, with the two helicopters in the back, and it looks a bit like The Last Supper with Jesus there and all that. These bad guys with the guns tucked into their belts, having a little lunch there with Coca-Cola bottles and ready for the action in the afternoon. And here they are doing a bit of target training. But then soon enough, here they're back in action and they're raiding a place where probably there's a lot of cocaine being cooked up, and dangerous place. As you can see, one of these drug enforcement agents, he got shot in the leg. So all these situations, they are dangerous. He always had kind of a star with him, a lucky star with him, Perry, that he's still alive today and seen all of these things. Then I think this is one of typical prison stories from Perry, San Quentin. Him, again, like getting access to all these different prisoners, going into their cell. It's great studies of, I mean, I don't think Perry liked these people a lot, but he was drawn to them. And they were probably also drawn to him. He told me one time, like there was one guy he went to see over and over again, like a couple of years, a black guy who was on death row. And he was actually then being getting the day to be executed. And he had a last wish. And he wanted Perry, his friend Perry, to be there and witness while he was being executed. So Perry went there. When you, I mean, it's a bit like sitting in a church. He showed me some pictures of that too. And then there's the glass wall, and behind it is that stretcher, or, you know, the kind of a chair or something. It wasn't the electric chair. He got executed with injections or something. And Perry sitting there in the chair, this other guy who he met through the years sitting on the other side of the glass, getting the injections and looking Perry in the eyes while the light slightly goes out and life goes away. So these are kind of characters Perry knew how to be friends and talk with. I think this is also an amazing picture. The tough guy gang in prison. Make a good screensaver, Hans-Hermann.
Maybe. I was just thinking what you were saying. I'm wondering why he was so drawn into going into war, going into death row cells, doing all of this. I think it somehow he touched them and it touched him, what was there, because of his own story, his own upbringing, his own small brushes with being against the law, also his meeting death in one way or another without getting caught and getting away with it. There is something to it, and that shows, I think, in the picture. That's also what makes the pictures interesting, and it is also what sets him apart from many people in an editing office, because most of the people talk about it endlessly, but they've never experienced what Perry has.
This is a picture, actually, Perry won the World Press Photo Prize for. This is, caption reads, this is Dictator Mobutu's pool after he escaped, and then some of the rebels jumping into the pool and getting the weapons out which were thrown in there. And that's probably the most famous picture Perry took. That can occasionally see in books and in places. So
and I suspect that it's a little bit like Werner Herzog Fitzcarraldo. It's like at this famous film from Werner Herzog, the indigenous people had to move up the boat over the hill many times before Werner Herzog was happy with the shoot, and presumably this guy must have jumped into the water and out of the water, raised the arms, the rifle or so many times until Perry finally got what he had. But the fact that the guy did it was presumably because he liked what Perry was doing, and it paid off. World Press Prize.
These were Perry's bodyguards. I think if you in a situation where your bodyguards look like that, then just imagine how the other guys look like. And if you just imagine yourself, would I feel comfortable in a place like that, going to take pictures and to work with these guys around you, protecting you, and you probably hear gun sound in the back, and probably a colleague of Hans-Hermann from Stern calling you, when do we get the pictures? And just imagine a bit how life, this kind of working life must have been for Perry. And then coming into situations like that, to see a lot of dead people. And that's Perry, again, like over and over, when looking to his photos, there were always photos of children. He had a very, very soft spot for children. This is a story he did in Bogota. With children living in the street in Bogota, that was probably very early one. I don't know what year it was, but I imagine that must have been in the 60s. And he was a couple of days or maybe even longer, he was living in the street or spending a lot of time with these kids. Here's another group photo, so you can see a bit, that's something he liked to do. And any photographer here knows to take good group photos is one of the hardest things there is. Much easier to take a good photo of a single person, but to do a good group photo is one of the hardest things. And Perry managed to do that over and over again, like these haunting images. I actually like the little guy there. He looks a bit like a young Pablo Picasso. I don't know why, but you know, funny, amazing, these characters, these kids, and them looking like, I mean, they look like adults already, and they're probably just, some of them are 8 years old, and they look like they're old souls. And here doing their little scheme with begging and always in trouble with the police. That's, I think, how they slept. That's a beautiful portrait, very untypical for Perry, nice picture. And so we thought it would be nice in the book. Then Perry was, of course, also in Iraq, like you were talking a bit about that time, Hans-Hermann, when Saddam was still the ruler. He went there.
This was when he came back. Then he decided now he's getting too old, because you have to imagine not only his age but also the fact that it was at a time when the temperatures were rising to 40, 42, 44 degrees Celsius. So you needed a lot of water, and even people half his age or could barely stand it. So, but the fact that he really had to fight with himself in order to make these pictures happen didn't prevent him from doing those photographs. He was tough and he was going if it needed to be.
Then he went to Nicaragua, to the civil war a few times, and this is with the Sandinistas when they finally won the civil war. And it's also very easy to characterize a bit how Perry worked in situations like that. I think we talked about that in the beginning. He was always able to play both sides. So here we are in a civil war with the rebels, the Sandinistas, fighting the Somoza, the dictator, and Perry somehow becoming friends with both. So usually, he said during the night, he usually spent time with the Sandinistas and hanging out with them. And then during the day, he would spend time at Somoza's heavily guarded compound, the dictator, and fooling around a bit with him, you know, telling him to posing a bit for Perry's photos. And I mean, I would make a bet. Nobody in that time got a photo of Somoza which looks like that. No other photographer. That only Perry was able to get this personal kind of private life Somoza, and at the same time going at night to the arch enemies of this dictator who he was at war with, and spending time with the Sandinistas at night and hanging out with them, and spending a lot of time with the rebels, like this woman who later became I think she became a minister of culture or minister of education or something. And I like this picture a lot, and I thought it makes a good photo also for the cover, because it's a bit an iconic photo. It's the female version of a Che Guevara, kind of, and I like it also because it hasn't been seen everywhere. And so it's also like with that person, he knew this person or knows this person, and they stayed in touch for a long time. And that is also Perry, I think. And at the same time,
obviously, the Sandinistas look more attractive than the Somosistas did.
And that's actually, now we are actually through the whole book. I didn't think we would manage, but that's it. So let's see if there's anybody having any questions.
Don't be shy.
Donald, that's a great, great storytelling along with these pictures. Can you just remind us, for people who didn't see this from the beginning, how you know Perry and how you know all these inside stories?
I was for actually a short time, but I was art director for Stern magazine, and that was in 2007, 2008, sorry. And when I was there in Hamburg in my office, I think on my second day or something, Perry walks into my office. I didn't know who he was. He just walks in there and just kind of grinned at me, and he said, "Ah, here you're the new art director." And he just sat down, and I was busy, and like Perry, I didn't even know who he was, or I need to go and have meetings. But then he just said, "Oh, I'm going to wait here for you." So, okay. So I went to a couple of meetings, came back an hour or so later, and then Perry was still there. And I don't know, you know how it is with people. Sometimes you meet somebody, you hit it off immediately. And I think with Perry, we kind of had immediately a good connection, liked each other. And I could also, from my own personal history, relate to quite a lot of his things, because not that I went to a lot of wars and stuff, but I grew up in Switzerland. When I was in my early 20s, I also went to New York. And at that time, New York was still a pretty rough place. And so I could relate a lot, and also, you know, liking the world of photography and being an art director and the magazines. And so we built this friendship over the years, and we spent a lot of time and visit, and we had fun evenings, and always working a bit on that book project, which took way too long. And all the book publishers I actually called, they all say, "Oh no, that book, you know, we can't make money with a book like that." And they always say, "I know you can't make money, but I'm not doing it for the money. I want to make it for Perry, and I think it's a great book. Nobody has that kind of history." And one day, like 8-9 years later, actually, I meet a book publisher who happens also to be Swiss and also lived in the United States for a long time. And I told him a little bit about Perry, and he immediately said, without even seeing the pictures, he said, "That sounds amazing, let's do that book." And so that's a bit how we did it. And with Perry, I just feel a bit, I have a close relationship with Perry, and I think he's just, these kind of people I find interesting to spend my time with, because I could just be there and ask Perry 1,000 questions. And there's not that many people who have that kind of stories. But again, he's a big storyteller. Really need to spend time to kind of get it out of himself.
Any more questions?
Yeah, I have a question. And first of all, thank you for the great presentation and to put this together, and all of us. And I know the book quite well because I'm Donald's girlfriend, but it was different now to hear talking about the stories, and also what you, Hans-Hermann, said, like about the book and all what you add on this situation. And my question goes to you, that how did you communicate at these days? And how you could make sure that Perry wasn't in prison, or like, I mean, he had a lot of friends on one of the other side, but yeah, how was this at these days?
Yeah, you can hardly imagine that that people were working on other sides of the world in conflicts nowadays, that we have constant communication, more or less, even in the weirdest situation. But as it was, you see, I joined the magazine in the 80s. And Perry already was there in the 70s. Usually there was no contact for days on end. And what you very often used was, I don't even know what the English word is for, what's the German word actually? When you tick this ticker kind of thing, what's the English word for it? I don't even recall the German right now. So for days on end, you didn't hear anything. And then basically later on, when there was a telephone connection, the first thing, and you learned this from Perry very early on, even telephones don't work very well. So the first thing what you do in a hotel is you go to usually the women who were sitting there responsible for the telephone system of the hotel. You give them $20 at the very first moment to make sure that if you want a connection, or if somebody wants to call you, or you need messages, that you will get them. It took very often, it took days, but even later on, you see also it used to be that people had real films, and you had to send your films away if you were not traveling back. At that point, you could usually give it to airline pilots and airline crews, and they were picked up at airports, say Lufthansa and Frankfurt were picking them up, and they were transported to Hamburg. Also not imaginable today's anymore that this would work out. And later on, when there was transmission usually of photographs was very expensive, and only the huge agencies did it. So we had constant discussions about Perry. We don't want, you see, this is not going to be a big story. We don't want more than 10, because this costs about 2,000 German marks at that time to have these 10 pictures. Please do not send 20 or 25. He did it nevertheless, and he also made sure that we had the pictures where he was on to be sure that we could also present him. So we had all these discussions and all the complications that there were, and you would not hear from people on end, and you couldn't even say, as you would nowadays, give me a call, send me a message every day at a certain time, and if you don't, then 2 hours later, and if something happens, let me know. You basically trusted that things would work out and you would get the information. And it's amazing, Meg, I don't think journalism was worse at that time.
Hans, was he on assignment, or did he just go out and find his own stories, or how was that? How did it work?
You see, he was employed, so he had to basically convince people that editors, foreign editors-in-chief for the larger stories, that he would want to go there. But in those times when magazines were still making a lot of money and people were flying business class and what have you, it could happen. And I remember I was very new in my job as foreign editor, and one day when the phone rang and it was Perry, and he was saying, I'm sitting at the, whatever it was called, Pan Am First Class Lounge in Frankfurt, and I'm off to Jamaica. So if you don't want that story, you have another half hour, and then I'll be gone. And that's not imaginable nowadays anymore. So he went off also on his own and came back with stories, or he didn't. And that was possible because there were enough stories that he could do and that were good for the magazine.
Well, I would one moment take the opportunity and say there's a book, we've seen it, but it's much better when you hold it in your hands and you browse through it. It's actually a thick book, and it's much worth having. So for Gracie, I'm not the only one. Donald, maybe you can give some information about the book, some hard facts and where to get it, because that's not quite so easy. I couldn't get it at Amazon, for instance. So where can we get it? And how long did you work on this? now he's gone. I'm promoting his book, and he's no longer online.
He's on to a sequel.
Yeah, right. But it's published by Sturm und Drang in Switzerland, and when you Google for Perryworld, you find it. And what I can say is, and that's what we chose as the title for this event. There is not just a book, and it's not about a photo reporter. It's about a very special
Nein, die promoten gerade das Buch.
And I can only highly recommend it as a piece of human history because that's what it is. Donald is not here, so still I think we've stretched it far enough.
It looks like a fantastic format as well.
Yeah, it is.
No drinks
It's
though.
large.
Go on, please, Hans.
I was just saying, unfortunately, no drinks being served.
Yeah, we will go there and do that next time. Donald is back.
Yes,
So maybe
I don't know.
question. I said it's pretty hard to get the book because it's not on Amazon. So how can we get it?
You can just order it to the publisher. There are also some bookstores in Germany which have it, but the easiest is if you go to, what's it called, Sturm und Drang. It's written in one word, Sturm, S-T-U-R-M, and Drang, D-R-A-N-G.com. And there you will find the Paris book.
And in case someone has difficulties finding that, I suggest send an email to assistant@americanclub.de. I know how to find Donald, and then we can make sure that all the relevant information gets to you. So I think we've stretched it enough. We planned this for a good hour. Now we've an hour and 40 minutes full. Hans-Hermann and Donald, thank you so much for spending your time with us. We'll cut this as much as possible with the difficulties that Zoom brought us today into a little video and put it on YouTube and our website. And I would like to invite you to go to americanclub.de. And if you don't want to become a member, you can still sign up for our newsletter at the bottom of the page. We'll have upcoming events in this online series like a beer tasting, craft beer tasting with a beer sommelier, which is interesting. And I think it will be more interesting when we get to the 6th beer. That's, I think, in 2 weeks. And when you sign up, you get the invites for our upcoming events and can sign up. Digital events are always free of charge, so you're welcome to join. Thank you so much, and have a fantastic evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks so much. Thanks, Hans. Thanks, Donald.
Thank you.